What is your greatest nightmare story? We live in a condo and began receiving $100 fines for not picking up dog poop. The area behind our building is a common area and lots of people walk their dogs around. I offered to submit DNA testing for my dogs and they ignored me and continued to send notices of fines. I began taking my phone with me on every walk and took photos and videos of me picking up poop with timestamp evidence. I sent a folder full of photos to the HOA with photographic evidence that I was picking up after my dogs. We continued to receive fines. I got a small trash can and kept on my patio and began saving my bags of dog poop for 2 weeks. I did tie the bags but they were still obviously smelly as poop bags are very thin plastic. I then mailed a box of poop to the HOA office along with copies of timestamped photos showing I had picked it up. I told them that I had better not ever receive another fine for dog poop because I had provided more than sufficient evidence that it wasn't us. Miraculously, the fines stopped and we haven't received any for over 2 years. We've only been part of an HOA for the last few months, and it's already living up to every stereotype I ever had in my head. They held our once annual meeting with very little notice, and like 6 people showed up. They elected a new association and immediately decided to spend $700 on dog shit receptacles, even though like 4 people have dogs, and the whole neighborhood is one street. This sparked an incredible amount of drama. One guy on the HOA decided he was going to get super defensive when people started questioning this decision, and it quickly devolved into him just taunting people on Facebook because he was on the board and they weren't, and if they didn't like his authority, they should change the bylaws. Then someone left a bunch of dog shit in his driveway. Then he resigned from the HOA. No word on the dog shit receptacles. This has all happened in the past 3 days. Lived in a high-rise in Chicago that had an HOA full of old people with too much money. Fortunately, I was only renting, but I was curious to learn about the HOA and they were gracious enough to let me sit in. The condo had just built a brand new outdoor patio for grilling, etc. The powers that be didn't like the shade of red of the cobblestone brick that they laid for the area, so they allocated $1 million to redo the entire area with new brick. There were a few attendees who were young professionals who protested, but they were heavily outvoted by the contingent of wealthy old people who felt this was a justifiable use of funds. Outrageous. Other way around, my mom was the president of the HOA for her backwoods little neighborhood. Maybe 30 people lived there. Everyone used one well. The well had a problem once so no one had water. It was $800 for a temporary fix or $2,000 for a permanent fix. My mom had a meeting where out of the 30 ppl 5 showed up. No big deal, those 5 people funded the $800 to get it fixed since they've been without water for almost a week. No one would spilt the cost and dues were so low it didn't cover them so those 5 people paid for everyone's well. Well, in preparation for the actual fix she tried to raise money but only got halfway there when it broke. My mom went door to door asking for everyone's share before they'd fix it. It was like $50. It was another week without water. No one would pay for the well they all used. Finally around half of the neighborhood raised the money to fix it. Later they all had a huge barbecue at my parents' house but the people who didn't pay weren't invited. Mother-in-law was fighting stage 4 ovarian cancer a few years ago. Had no desire to take down our Christmas lights. We were constantly visiting the hospital, was very touch and go. Had a child under 1. Was a very emotional time. HOA compliance officer constantly would stop at our house at all hours of the day. We had security cameras so finally after reviewing the footage we called the guard shack to see what the emergency was. We were told that Christmas has been over for 3 weeks and we need to have our lights down before the end of the month or he would fine us $25 a day for the first week, then $50 each day after that. We explained the situation, and the guy said, well, it's not my problem, take your lights down. My wife exploded on the dusha bag. Went to the next board meeting and let loose on the board and general manager. Turns out it wasn't a HOA policy. The guy worked for the security company that was hired to work the main entrance guard shack, and would get a bonus if he would patrol and hand out fines for HOA violations. This asshole would just drive around and make up his own rules and fines and by the next meeting was fired, and a new security company was hired when the contract was up in the summer. Everything worked out in the end. Douche fired, MIL cancer-free for over a year. We have the HOA president from the Third Reich. This man is on such a power trip you'd think he was running a massive gulag with the lives of 1 million peasants at his disposal. He protects even the most trivial information as if it were top secret intelligence and dispenses his own brand of justice with no regard for the actual rules. And he's a liar. At the last general HOA meeting we sat for 40 solid minutes while he regaled us with his vague bullshit stories about his years as a Special Forces officer in the United States Army. According to him, he's been shot, twice, held for ransom in an undisclosed foreign hellhole, and awarded top-secret military honors that he isn't allowed to talk about. Here's the thing, though. He's maybe 5 feet 5 inches, weighs at least 350 pounds, didn't know how to break down the gym weightlifting equipment, and made a complete ass of himself by saluting a neighbor who came to the meeting late still wearing his BDUs. The neighbor, who works at the nearby military base, laughed out loud and said, "Dude, I'm an E4. Guess who got written up for leaving his garbage cans out?" Upscale beach neighborhood, repeatedly refused my solar panel application, cited the location of them as being an eyesore, top of the back side of the house, not visible from street, and fought me at 4 different meetings, delaying my installation, ultimately cited the state law and they immediately backed down and amended their covenants. P.S. A clothesline is a solar collection device, and they cannot deny you use of that either, so if you want to play dirty, hang a bunch of beach towels in your yard. I lived in a neighborhood with a park in the center, located directly behind my back fence. The entire neighborhood was managed by the same HOA company, but the neighborhood was officially set up as 2 different HOA communities. Even though it was on the other side of my fence, the park was designated as part of the community I was not in. On multiple occasions, the irrigation system in the park broke and completely flooded my backyard. 3 or 4 times over a span of a few months, I woke up to literally 1.5 feet of water. Over time, my brick fire pit literally sank into the ground. An entire layer of brick water came into my kitchen on 2 of the occasions, and every time my home's foundation looked weaker and weaker after cleanup. I called to complain to the HOA each time. The flooding almost always happened on a weekend, and it wouldn't be until Monday that they came out, leaving my home flooded for a minimum of 2 days each time. After the 3rd or 4th complaint, I finally reported them to the BBB and the Water Authority, and I sent a video to the local news. The next business day the head of the HOA company called me furious. Despite all the pictures and videos I'd sent, she said she was convinced I was making it all up. When I pressed her why she thought that, she specifically said it was because the park can't be flooding your house. It's not even part of the same HOA community you live in. Was moving to a different city and crashed at my dad's townhouse for a few months to save money for the move. One day a guy showed up to install a satellite dish that my dad ordered. My dad isn't the type of guy to pay very close attention to HOA rules, and apparently missed a brand new, and highly contentious, rule that satellite dishes were eyesores and no longer allowed. So just as the installer guy is getting up to the roof, this couple, head of the HOA, comes sprinting from their townhouse across the street to shut it down, screaming bloody murder. I had absolutely no issue with not getting a satellite dish, it wasn't even my house, but these 2 HOA thugs were absolutely awful. The wife was just hurling insults at the installer guy and the husband immediately started climbing the ladder up onto the roof to kick the shit out of the installer guy. None of this was provoked at all, it just went from 0 to 100 miles per hour in no time flat, and this couple was out of control. Well, the installer guy eventually had enough of having racist insults hurled at him and came down the ladder and started a full-on brawl with the husband in my dad's driveway. The wife was screaming at the top of her lungs at me, a stone couch surfer whose only contribution to this whole fiasco was to answer a door and let a guy on the roof. I still vividly remember being absolutely dumbfounded watching these 2 grown men beat the hell out of each other while I tried to communicate to my dad on the phone over the shrill sounds of some strange woman absolutely berating me for ruining the neighborhood. It was wild. This isn't quite a traditional HOA story, but I still think it is interesting. So at my school they closed off a fence letting kids go out one way, to walk home. Because of this my walk home was extended like 5 minutes, but it was still annoying. However, one old dude named Frank let me walk through his yard to dramatically slow down the time of my walk home. Then he died, RIP, and his son liked me and gave me cookies, and then said the HOA said I couldn't do it anymore. I'm still a bit bitter, but the cookies were very good, so it all evens out. My dad lives in one of those weird over 50 communities. He was a member of their equivalent to an HOA. He was asked what mulch to get for the properties. He thought it was a nothing decision, so he picked one. His email was flooded with complaints about how the mulch was too dark. Flooded, legit angry hate mail. They actually did go buy new mulch, it was crazy. TLDR, your HOA has to deal with your BS too sometimes. They still typically suck and 90% of them have no justification for even existing. My at-the-time girlfriend, now wife, rented a townhouse with friends in a community that had an HOA. There was a parking reserved for guests of the tenants. Ironically, parking was always an issue for my wife and her roommates but always simple for me. I just popped on the visitor's pass and was good to go in that lot. I spent the night probably once or twice a week, and one day I awoke to find my car missing. After some ace detective work, I found out that my 10-year-old, at the time, 5-speed manual transmission Honda had not been stolen, but just towed. When I reached out to the HOA, they told me that there was a provision in the bylaws that said a car could only be parked in a visitor's spot for a maximum of 72 hours and that a board member submitted my car to a list of cars to be towed due to abusing a visitor's pass. They argued the language in the bylaws was such that the total amount of time that a car may be parked in the visitor's lot was 72 hours, non-consecutively, i.e., if you park there once a week for 10 hours each week, on the 8th week we are in violation of the policy. This in opposition to the clear purpose of the provision, which is to prevent people from storing their cars in the lot. They summarily denied my request at the next HOA meeting to recover the $150 towing fee. Long story short, I sued them in small claims court and got back the towing fee plus court costs, plus, they engaged a lawyer, so I feel good about wasting some of their retainer as well. My mom's been going through a lot of stupid HOA shit recently. 2.5 years ago she needed a new storm door, and contacted the HOA to get the proper paperwork for the request. 7 attempts and 3 weeks later, after getting zero reply from the HOA she decided to just go through with it by contacting the contractor the HOA uses and having them install one of their standard doors. She needed the door changed because the one in place was broken, and didn't want to risk having to endure them installing in late fall, winter. This past November, the HOA contacted her saying her door was in violation of their standards and that she was required to change it before January. She contacted a lawyer over it, and, long story short, she has to change the door. I told her that the HOA can go fuck themselves because she tried to do it their way and they never responded. On top of that, who didn't notice the door in 2 years' time? It's obvious it's not the same as the doors on the other condos. From as far back as you can see her unit. The real story here is that the guy in charge of the HOA is a power-tripping asshole who enforces the bylaws whenever he feels like it. Complete big fish in a little pond scenario, but he's really a small fish in the smallest pond. Pushing around a 65-year-old retiree over a $300 door, which for some reason they told her was nearly $4,000. Is Bush League bullshit. My story is more of an almost nightmare. My husband and I were looking for condos forever but no place had a garage space. We live near downtown, which is our #1 item on our list of needs. One pops up that is everything we could have asked for. It was $10,000, total of about $140,000, over what we wanted to spend, but it was perfect. We asked the realtor to look into why it was suspiciously affordable, considering the neighborhood, size, condition, etc. Turns out, the building was doing some exterior renovations and it was going to be costing each unit, out of pocket, $60,000. Holy balls. In the month after we had viewed that condo, 7 more units from that building went up for sale because everyone was trying to jump ship. I sat in on a HOA meeting once because I was the sort of weird teenager who had nothing better to do, and I listened in on a meeting that, in part, planned on encouraging an interracial couple to move out. For the curious, they didn't burn any crosses or anything, though one guy suggested it and didn't get immediately shouted down. Mostly it manifested as passive aggression because they were too chicken to do anything else. The interracial couple continues to live happily in the neighborhood.